The Ashen Ledger, a mystery novel. The archivist's last night. *1. The city of salt and silence. The city sat on the edge of the sea like a patient animal waiting for a cue. Salt clung to every surface, stone, glass, even breath. In the mornings, the air carried the sharp tang of brine and the older, quieter scent of old paper, damp, yellowed, and stubbornly preserved. The harbor was beautiful in postcards and cruel in reality, where fog rolled in like a rumor and tides rearranged the shoreline overnight. I had returned here after years away, not because I wanted to, but because a letter had arrived with my name written in a hand I hadn't seen in a decade. The handwriting belonged to Mara Venn **, the archivist at the *City Historical Repository **, a place built to keep the past from escaping. The letter was brief, come quickly. The ledger is missing, someone is watching the vault. No return address. No signature beyond the familiar tight script, only a date and a time, *8:17 p.m. that night. I arrived at the repository just as dusk bled into night, the streetlights flickering as if the city itself was nervous. The building was a pale stone monument to bureaucracy, its windows darkened by years of soot and secrecy. The heavy iron gate was half open, as if someone had left in a hurry. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. The usual warmth of paper and ink was absent, replaced by a sterile, waiting quiet. Mara stood at the entrance desk, her face drawn with fatigue. Her eyes flicked toward the corridor that led to the vault. "You came," she said, voice small. "I came," I replied, and the words sounded more like a promise than a statement. "Don't touch anything," she warned. "Not yet." The repository's vault was a steel door set into stone, sealed with a mechanism older than the building itself. Mara unlocked it with a key that looked like it had been forged for a different era. The door opened with a reluctant sigh. Inside, the vault was a long chamber of metal shelves, each one stacked with boxes, ledgers, and sealed bundles. The air smelled of cold iron and old varnish, but the space felt wrong, emptier than it should have been, as if someone had taken something and left the room rearranged to hide the gap. Mara pointed to a shelf near the back. It was here. "What was here?" I asked. "The Ashen Ledger," she said. "The original record of the city's founding, contracts, names, dates, and the first agreements. It hasn't been moved since the building was constructed, or so I thought." I stepped closer. The shelf was clean, too clean. No dust, no marks, no sign of struggle. It looked like it had been carefully prepared for inspection. "Someone took it," Mara said, "and they did it without leaving a trace." A thin sheet of paper lay on the shelf, as if placed there deliberately. It was blank except for a single symbol, an inked circle with a thin line through it, like a ring broken in half. Mara's breath caught. "That's not mine." I turned, scanning the vault. The silence felt practiced, as if the building was holding its breath. "When did you last see the ledger?" "Yesterday afternoon," she said. "I cataloged it for the annual audit. It was exactly here when I left." "And you locked the vault?" "Of course." "Who has access?" Mara hesitated. "The mayor's office, the city clerk, the board of trustees, a few senior staff, but the key is controlled." "Controlled by whom?" "By me," she said, and the admission carried the weight of responsibility. "And by the head of records." "Who is the head of records?" Mara's eyes flicked toward the door. "Elias Rourke. He's been on leave for the last month, medical reasons. No one's seen him." The name landed like a stone. I had heard it before, years ago, in a different context, connected to a scandal that had nearly destroyed the city's reputation. A scandal that had been quietly buried, not resolved. "Rourke is missing?" I asked. Mara nodded. "He didn't return my calls. His office is empty. His assistant says he's on extended leave, but there's no paperwork, no explanation." A chill ran through the vault. then someone is lying. Mara's voice dropped, and they're lying about more than that. We left the vault and walked back through the repository. The building seemed larger at night, its corridors stretching into darkness. Mara led me to her office, a small room filled with boxes and a desk piled with files. The window looked out onto the courtyard, where a single lamp burned, too small, too isolated. Mara opened a drawer and produced a folder. This is what I was working on before the ledger disappeared. Inside were photocopies of old contracts, letters, and a map of the city's original boundaries. The dates were from the early settlement period, when the harbor was being claimed and the first civic agreements were written. At the top of one document was the same symbol from the vault, broken ring. I found it while cross-referencing records, Mara said. It appears in the margins of several documents, always in the same place, next to the signatures. It's not a mark I've seen in any other archive. Who signed those documents? I asked. Mara hesitated. The founding families, the original council. Some names are familiar, names that still appear on city buildings and street signs. And the ledger itself, I asked. What does it contain that someone would risk breaking into the repository to steal? Mara's eyes went distant. Proof, she said. Proof of ownership, proof of promises, proof of the city's first agreements. If the ledger is gone, the city can rewrite its history. The air in the room seemed to tighten. A sound drifted from the corridor, soft, almost imperceptible. A footstep, perhaps, or the shifting of a box. Mara stood suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. We're not alone. I moved to the door, listening. The repository had gone silent again, too silent. I stepped into the corridor and saw nothing, only the long stretch of shadowed hallways and the distant glow of the entrance. But then I noticed it. A thin line of light beneath Mara's office door, and a flicker of movement, someone stepping quickly away. I turned back. Mara, stay here. I walked toward the source of the light, careful to keep my steps quiet. The corridor opened into a larger reading room, where tables and chairs were arranged in neat rows. A single lamp burned at the far end, illuminating a figure standing beside a row of shelves. The figure turned as I approached. It was a man in a dark coat, face partially obscured by the brim of a hat. He held a small stack of files. "Who are you?" I demanded. The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped toward the exit, moving with a calm, practiced speed. I lunged, but he was already at the door. The air rushed past as he vanished into the night. I ran to the door and looked out into the courtyard. The lamp burned alone. The figure was gone. When I returned to Mara's office, she was standing by the window, staring into the darkness. "Did you see him?" "I saw someone," I said. "He got away, but he left something." On the table where the files had been was a single sheet of paper, another blank page, but this time with a message written in a tight, urgent hand. "The ledger is not the only thing that matters. Stop looking." Mara's face went pale. "That's Elias Rourke's writing." My pulse quickened. "How can you be sure?" "I've seen it for years," she said. "Every memo, every report, it's his. He's alive, he's here." The words hung between us. The repository, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. *2, the first clue in the ash. The next morning, the city woke to a thin layer of ash drifting through the air, as if the sea had coughed up the remnants of a fire. The harbor was quiet, but the quiet felt staged, too calm, too controlled. People moved with purpose, eyes down, as if they were trying not to attract attention. I went to the police station first, hoping for help, but the response was cautious. The missing ledger was treated as an administrative matter, not a crime. The chief listened politely, then advised me to speak with the city clerk. At the city hall, the clerk's office was busy, filled with forms and files and the steady hum of bureaucracy. The clerk, A thin man named Harlan Quell wore spectacles and an air of practiced patience. When I asked about the ledger, his expression tightened. "The Ashen Ledger is part of the repository's collection," he said. "It's not a city document that can be moved without authorization." "Then it was stolen," I said. Quell's gaze flicked toward the hallway. "There's no evidence of theft. The repository is secure. Archivists sometimes misplace items." Mara had been right. The city wanted this to disappear. I left City Hall and walked toward the repository again, determined to find the truth before it vanished completely. Mara was already there, waiting by the vault. The broken ring symbol was still in my mind, and the message from the night before. "Rourke is involved," I said. "We need to find him." Mara nodded. "I've been going through his office again. There's a hidden cabinet I never noticed before." We returned to the repository, to the corridor where Rourke's office sat. The door was locked, but Mara had a key. Inside, the office was orderly, too orderly, as if someone had cleaned it with intention. The desk was bare, the files neatly stacked. Mara walked to a bookcase and ran her fingers along the edge. "Here," she said, pressing a panel that clicked open. A small cabinet revealed itself, containing a stack of documents and a leather-bound journal. The journal's spine was cracked, its pages stained with ink and time. On the first page was the broken ring symbol. Mara turned the pages carefully. The entries were dated, written in Rourke's hand, and they detailed his work on the ledger, cross-references, notes, and a growing sense of urgency. One entry stood out. "They're rewriting the city's origin. If the ledger disappears, they'll succeed. I must protect it." Below that, another line. "The ring is the key. The ring is the proof." Mara's voice was quiet. "The ring, what ring?" I remembered the city's founding story. A ceremonial ring had been used to seal the first agreements, a symbol of unity and trust. It had been lost for generations, a piece of the city's mythology. "Rourke believed the ring is real," I said, "and that it's connected to the ledger." Mara flipped further. The journal described a plan. Rourke intended to move the ledger to a secure location, to protect it from the people who wanted it gone. The last entry was dated the night before the ledger disappeared. "They're coming for it tonight. I can't wait any longer. I'm taking it to the old archive beneath the lighthouse." My heart tightened. "The lighthouse archive?" Mara nodded. "It's a sealed storage site beneath the old lighthouse, an emergency vault built after a fire in the early days. It's been abandoned for decades." We left the repository immediately, the ash drifting around us like a warning. The lighthouse stood at the edge of the cliffs, a tall, weathered tower that had guided ships for centuries. The wind was sharp, the sea loud. The entrance to the underground archive was hidden behind a maintenance door, its lock rusted and old. Mara produced a set of keys. "Rourke gave me these years ago. He said they were for emergencies." We descended into the darkness, the air growing colder. The steps led to a stone chamber lined with shelves, where old documents were stored in sealed boxes. The place smelled of damp stone and long-forgotten history. And there, on a shelf near the back, lay the Ashen Ledger. It was intact, the leather cover darkened with age, the pages thick and brittle. The broken ring symbol was stamped on the spine. But the ledger was not alone. A body lay on the floor beside it, Elias Rourke, his face pale, his eyes open, his throat marked by a thin, deliberate line of pressure. Mara gasped, stepping back. "He's dead." I moved closer, careful not to disturb the scene. Rourke's hand was clenched around a small object, an iron ring, its surface engraved with the same broken symbol. The message was clear. The ring had been found and the price had been paid. *3. The city's silence turns to fear. We called the police, but the response was slow. The station seemed reluctant to treat Rourke's death as anything more than an unfortunate accident, as if the city was trying to keep the past from surfacing again. Mara and I began to piece together the truth. The Ashen Ledger contained the original agreements that defined the city's land claims, its founding families, and the promises that had been made and broken over generations. Someone had been quietly rewriting those agreements, removing inconvenient names, altering dates, and erasing evidence of corruption. The broken ring symbol was a mark of resistance, a warning that the original record still existed. Rourke had been protecting it, moving it, and trying to expose the fraud. And now he was dead. The ring in his hand was the key, the proof. Whoever had taken the ledger had also taken the ring, unless someone had placed it there to frame the scene. Mara and I returned to the repository, searching for any remaining clues. We found another message, written on a sheet of paper tucked into the vault. "You can't stop what's already started." The threat was personal, direct. That night, as the ash continued to drift through the city, I understood what was happening. The city's history was being rewritten, and the people rewriting it would do anything to keep the truth buried. Mara and I had to find the ring, expose the fraud, and stop whoever was behind it before the city lost its memory forever. The ring that breaks history. **1. The lighthouse in the hidden archive. The morning after we discovered Rourke's body, the city felt different, quieter, more guarded. The ash had thinned, but the air still held a sense of unease, as if everyone was waiting for the next sign. People moved with their eyes down, conversations were brief, and even the usual bustle of the harbor seemed muted. Mara and I returned to the repository early, determined to treat the case like the crime it was. We secured the vault and began a methodical search of the building, looking for anything that connected the ledger, the ring, and the symbol to the people who had access. Mara showed me the city's original founding documents again. The broken ring symbol appeared in the margins, always near signatures, always with a certain consistency. It wasn't random, it was a mark of authentication, a seal that had been used to verify the legitimacy of the agreements. "If the ledger is the original record," I said, "then the symbol is the proof that the copies have been altered." Mara nodded. "And the ring is the physical object that matches the symbol. Whoever has the ring can prove the truth or destroy it." We needed to find that ring, and we needed to understand who had been moving the ledger, who had killed Rourke, and why the city was so determined to rewrite its history. That afternoon, I visited the lighthouse again. The underground archive was sealed, but the police had finally arrived to process the scene. Officers moved carefully, taking photographs, collecting evidence, and trying to keep the situation contained. The chief was present, but his expression was tight, his eyes wary. I approached him. "This is a murder," I said. "Rourke was killed because he was protecting the ledger." The chief's gaze flicked toward the archive entrance. "We're treating it as a suspicious death," he said, "but we need facts, not theories." "Facts are in the ledger," I said, "and in the ring. Rourke had the ring when he died." The chief's jaw tightened. "The ring wasn't found on the scene." My stomach sank. "What do you mean?" "Nothing was found," he said. "The area was disturbed. Evidence was compromised. We're still investigating." The implication was clear. Someone had moved the ring. Someone had cleaned the scene. The city was protecting its own. I left the lighthouse and walked back toward the repository, my mind racing. If the ring was missing, then the proof of the truth was missing too. Whoever had killed Rourke had taken it, and they would use it to control the narrative. Mara met me at the repository, her face drawn. "I've been thinking about the symbol," she said. "It's not just a mark, it's a pattern. If we map the documents where it appears, we can trace the alterations." We spent the afternoon cross-referencing documents, building a timeline of the city's founding agreements. The symbol appeared in the earliest records, then disappeared for decades, then reappeared in later documents, often near signatures that didn't match the originals. It's a trail, Mara said, a trail of fraud. And the ledger is the starting point, I said. We needed to find the ledger again. If it was still at the lighthouse archive, we could secure it. If it had been moved, we needed to follow the chain. That night we returned to the underground archive. The police had left, but the entrance was guarded by a hymn, explaining the urgency, but he refused to let us enter without authorization. Mara and I walked away, frustrated. The city was closing ranks. Then Mara stopped. There's another entrance, she said, a maintenance tunnel that connects the lighthouse to the repository. Rourke mentioned it in his journal. We returned to the repository and searched the basement. Hidden behind old storage boxes, we found a narrow passageway, its stone walls damp with age. The tunnel led toward the cliffs, toward the lighthouse. We descended, the air growing colder. The tunnel was long, its path uneven. At the end we found a heavy door, its iron surface scarred by time. Mara produced the keys Rourke had given her. The door opened with a reluctant creak. We stepped into the underground archive again, the space unchanged, except for the ledger. It was gone. The shelf where it had been was empty. The air felt disturbed, as if someone had been here recently. Mara's eyes went to the floor. There in the dust was the same broken ring symbol, drawn in a thin line. They were here, she said. They took it again. I scanned the room. Near the doorway, a scrap of paper lay on the ground. It was blank except for a single word. Stop. The message was not a warning, it was a command. Mara's voice was low. They're not just hiding the truth, they're controlling it. We left the archive, the tunnel stretching behind us like a long shadow. Outside, the city was quiet, but the quiet felt dangerous. The ash had returned, drifting through the streets as if the sea was trying to erase the evidence. We needed a plan, we needed allies, and we needed to find the ring before the city's history was rewritten permanently. *2. The founding families and the hidden agreement. The next day, we began to investigate the people who had the most to gain from altering the city's records. The founding families still held power, names like *Varon*, *Drennen*, and Quell*, the city clerk's family. Their influence extended into the mayor's office, the police department, and the repository itself. Mara and I compiled a list of documents where the broken ring symbol appeared, cross-referencing them with current land deeds and property records. We discovered discrepancies, properties that had been claimed by different families, boundaries that had shifted, and agreements that had been modified without explanation. This isn't just a clerical error, I said. It's a systematic rewrite. Mara nodded, and the ledger is the only thing that can prove it. We decided to confront the city clerk, Harlan Quell. His office was busy, as usual, but this time his calm demeanor seemed forced. When we asked about the ledger and the alterations, his expression tightened. The repository is responsible for its own records, he said. The city has no authority to interfere. Rourke is dead, I said. The ledger is missing. Someone is rewriting the city's history. That's interference. Quell's eyes flicked toward the hallway. You're making accusations without evidence. Mara placed the documents on his desk, the broken ring symbol clearly visible. This is evidence. The ledger contains the originals. We need access to it. Quell stood, his voice cold. You're not authorized to investigate this. Leave the city records to the proper authorities. We left his office, but the confrontation had confirmed what we suspected. The city was protecting the fraud. That evening, Mara received a call. The voice on the other end was distorted, almost unrecognizable. Stop looking, it said, or you'll end up like Rourke. Mara's hands shook. It was him, she whispered. It was the same voice from the repository. We needed to find the ring. If we could prove the symbol's authenticity, we could expose the altered agreements and force the city to acknowledge the truth. Mara remembered an old ceremony. The ring had been used during the city's founding, and it had been kept in the repository's most secure vault until it disappeared. The original location was a hidden compartment beneath the repository's main floor, a place that had been sealed for generations. We returned to the repository that night, moving quietly through the corridors. Mara led me to the basement, where the stone floor was marked by a series of old iron rings, seals that had once held the compartment closed. Mara produced a set of keys. "Rourke gave me these," she said. "He said they were the only keys to the original vault." We opened the compartment. Inside was a small chamber lined with stone and sealed with iron. The air smelled of dust and time, and there, resting on a velvet cloth, was the iron ring. It was the same broken ring symbol, the metal worn smooth by centuries of use. Mara's breath caught. We found it. But as we reached for it, a sound echoed through the basement, a slow, deliberate footstep. We turned to see a figure standing in the doorway, a dark coat, a hat obscuring the face. The figure held a gun. "Put it down," the voice said. Mara stepped back, her eyes wide. "Elias." The figure removed the hat. It was Elias Rourke, alive but changed. His face was thin, his eyes tired, his expression controlled. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. Mara's voice shook. "You're alive, you killed." "I didn't kill anyone," Rourke said, "but someone did. Someone who wants the ledger gone, someone who wants the ring gone." I stepped forward, my hands raised. "Then why did you take the ledger? Why did you leave the message?" Rourke's gaze flicked to the ring. "To protect it, to protect the city. The ledger is the only proof that the agreements are real. If it's destroyed, the fraud will be permanent." "And the ring?" I asked. Rourke's expression hardened. "The ring is the key. It proves the symbol is authentic. The people rewriting the records want it destroyed." A sound drifted from the corridor above, voices, footsteps. The building was waking up. Rourke moved quickly, taking the ring. "We need to leave. Now they're coming." We ran, the repository's corridors stretching into darkness. The air felt tight, as if the building was closing in. We reached the tunnel, descending toward the lighthouse, the ring clutched in Rourke's hand. Outside, the ash was falling again, the wind sharp. The sea roared against the cliffs. Rourke led us to a small boat, hidden near the shoreline. "We're leaving the city," he said. "For now, we need to expose the truth where they can't silence it." Mara and I stepped into the boat, the ring secure. The city receded into the fog, its lights dimming as the boat moved into the open water. But the truth was not gone. The Ashen Ledger still existed, the ring was in our possession, and the broken ring symbol was a promise that the city's history would be remembered. *4, the truth emerges. In the days that followed, Rourke revealed the full scope of the fraud. The founding families had altered the city's agreements over generations, removing inconvenient names, shifting land boundaries, and rewriting contracts to consolidate power. The Ashen Ledger was the only remaining original record, and the broken ring symbol was the mark of authenticity. We worked with journalists, historians, and a small group of lawyers willing to take the case. The ring and the ledger became the evidence that forced the city to confront its past. The trial that followed was long and difficult, but the truth could not be hidden forever. The altered agreements were exposed, the founding families were held accountable, and the city began to rebuild its history with honesty. Mara returned to the repository, restored to her role as archivist. Rourke, though still cautious, became a witness to the truth. And I, the outsider who had been drawn back by a letter, left the city knowing that its silence had been broken. The Ashen Ledger remained in the repository, its broken ring symbol a reminder that history can be rewritten, but it can also be restored. Below is a *** continuation and expansion plan that builds directly on the Ashen Ledger premise. with substantial new chapters that can realistically reach greater 2,000 words each deepen character arcs, raise the mystery's cost, and tighten the central conspiracy while still leaving room for later revelations. I'll keep the same mystery/suspense voice, coastal atmosphere, archival stakes, institutional cover-ups, and give you Chapter 3 and Chapter 4 in full narrative form, plus a scalable structure for the rest of the novel so you can extend it smoothly to your target length, 40,000 plus words. *1. The Shore After the Storm. The boat cut through a sea that had turned restless overnight. Ash had given way to rain, and the rain had turned the city into a slick, half-lit landscape, streetlights trembling, harbor lights smeared across water, the lighthouse a pale finger against a bruised sky. The wind carried salt and the faint scent of wet stone, as if the cliffs themselves were breathing. Elias Rourke sat at the stern, the iron ring wrapped in cloth and tucked into an inner pocket of his coat. His face was controlled, but his eyes kept scanning the shoreline as if he expected movement, shadows, lights, the sudden appearance of a figure waiting for them. Mara sat beside me, her shoulders hunched against the cold. The repository had been her life for years, and leaving it felt like tearing a page out of her own story. She stared at the water, then at Rourke, then finally back at me. "You don't look surprised," she said. "I'm not," I replied, "not anymore." Rourke's voice was quiet. "You should be. This city doesn't let anyone leave cleanly." We landed at a small inlet north of the city, a place used mostly by fishermen and the occasional late-night delivery. A narrow road wound up toward a cluster of stone cottages, and beyond them, the old coastal road that connected the city to the inland towns. Rourke had chosen the route carefully, less traveled, less monitored. We walked to a cottage that belonged to a retired records clerk, Sella Klein, who had once worked under Rourke and now lived in quiet exile after refusing to sign a set of altered deeds. The cottage was unassuming, tucked into the hillside with a small garden and a view of the water. Sella met us at the door with a wary expression, then stepped aside without a word. Inside, the air smelled of tea and old paper. Boxes lined the walls, stacked neatly, each labeled with dates and categories. The place felt like a smaller version of the repository, an archive that had refused to be absorbed. Sella poured tea and set a stack of documents on the table. "You brought the ring," she said, looking at Rourke. "I brought what matters," he replied. Mara's eyes went to the documents. "These are the originals." Sella nodded. "Copies of what I salvaged before they replaced them. The city has been rewriting its founding agreements for decades. First small changes, names, dates, boundary lines, then larger ones, land grants, easements, access rights. They've been turning the public record into private property." Rourke spread the documents out, the broken ring symbol visible in the margins. "The symbol is the seal," he said. "It's not just a mark, it's a physical verification. The ring matches the impression, the ink, the pressure. Without it, they can claim the alterations are routine corrections. With it, they can't." I studied the documents. The changes were subtle but deliberate. A signature that didn't quite match the original, a date that had been altered, a clause that had been added. The fraud wasn't random, it was systematic, and it had been happening long enough to entangle the city's entire legal history. Mara's voice was tight. "Why didn't anyone stop it?" Sella's expression hardened. "People tried, people disappeared, people were discredited. The founding families control the courts, the police, and the media. They control the narrative." Rourke's gaze turned toward the window, toward the city in the distance. "And now they're coming for the ledger. They're coming for the ring. They're coming for us." A knock sounded at the door, sharp, controlled. Sella's eyes widened. "They found us." Rourke stood, moving with purpose. "Mara, take the ring, hide it. If they take us, the ring must stay safe." Mara hesitated. then nodded. She wrapped the ring in cloth and tucked it into her coat. Rourke opened a side door that led to a narrow path down toward the water. The knock came again, louder this time. Sella opened the door a crack. A man stood on the threshold, dressed in plain clothes, his expression calm. "Elias Rourke," he said. "You're wanted for questioning about the theft of city property and the death of an archivist." Rourke stepped forward. "That's a lie." The man's eyes flicked past Rourke, scanning the room. "We know you're here. Come peacefully." Mara and I moved toward the side door, but the man's hand went to his coat too fast. A second figure appeared behind him, blocking the exit. Rourke didn't move. "You're making a mistake," he said. "The city is rewriting its history. The ledger proves it." The man's expression didn't change. "The ledger is missing. You're the suspect. Now come with us." Rourke's jaw tightened. "No." The first man stepped inside, followed by two others. They moved with the practiced efficiency of trained operatives, quiet, controlled, and intent. Rourke fought briefly, but they restrained him quickly. Mara stepped back, her breath quick. "Elias." "Run," Rourke said, his eyes locked on her. "Run. Don't let them take the ring." They grabbed Rourke and dragged him toward the door. Sella stood frozen, her hands trembling. The officers didn't harm her, but the message was clear. She was being watched. Mara and I fled through the side door, the cold air hitting us like a slap. We ran down the path toward the water, the rain turning the stones slick. Behind us, we heard shouting, footsteps, the sound of a vehicle starting. We reached the shoreline and found a small boat tied to a post, Rourke's backup plan. We pushed off, the water churning beneath us. The rain obscured the city, but the city's presence was still there. Lights, movement, the sense of a machine turning toward us. Mara clutched the ring against her chest. "They took him." "They took him to control us," I said. "They want the ledger and the ring. They want the proof gone." Mara's eyes were hard. "Then we don't stop." We navigated the boat toward a narrow channel that led to a secluded inlet on the far side of the cliffs. There, hidden by rock and fog, was an old lighthouse keeper's cottage, another place Rourke had prepared in case the city turned against him. The cottage was small, its windows dark. Inside, we found supplies, a stove, and a cache of documents, copies of the ledger's key pages, notes, and a list of names connected to the alterations. Rourke had been building a case for years. Mara spread the documents on a table. "We need to verify the changes," she said. "We need to prove the fraud in a way that can't be dismissed as clerical error." I looked at the list of names. The founding families, city officials, lawyers, and even some historians who had benefited from the rewritten records. The fraud had spread like a disease, infecting the city's institutions. Mara's voice was quiet. "The ring is the key. If we can authenticate the symbol, we can force a legal challenge. But we need witnesses. We need credibility." We spent the night working, comparing documents, building a timeline of alterations and identifying the most egregious changes. The fraud wasn't just about land, it was about control. Who had access? Who could build? Who could profit? Who could silence dissent? By morning, the rain had stopped, and the city looked deceptively calm. But we knew the calm was a mask. Mara and I decided to take the ring to a neutral party, someone the city couldn't easily intimidate. We chose Professor Livia Sorin ***, a historian at the university who had written critically about the city's founding myths. Her work had been dismissed as academic speculation, but she had the expertise and the reputation to verify the ring's authenticity. We traveled inland, keeping to back roads, avoiding the main highway. The university campus was quiet, the buildings gray against a pale sky. Professor Sorin's office was filled with books, maps, and the careful order of scholarship. She listened to our story, her expression shifting from skepticism to concern. "The broken ring symbol," she said. "It appears in the earliest settlement records. I've seen it referenced in letters, but I've never seen the physical object. If you have the ring, it changes everything. Mara produced the ring, unwrapping it carefully. Professor Soren examined it, comparing it to images in her books and to the documented impressions. Her eyes widened. This is real. This matches the seals. This is the original verification tool. She looked at us. Then the altered agreements are fraudulent. The city has been rewriting its history. Mara's voice was urgent. We need your help. Rourke is being held. The ledger is missing. The city is trying to bury this. Professor Soren stood, her expression resolute. Then we take this to the courts. We take it to the press. We take it to anyone who will listen. But before we could leave, a message arrived, delivered by a courier who refused to identify himself. It was a single sheet of paper, blank except for a single line. Bring the ring, or Rourke dies. Mara's face went pale. They're using him. Professor Soren's voice was steady. They're trying to control you. Don't give in. I looked at the ring, then at Mara. We can't trade it. If we give them the ring, the truth disappears forever. Mara nodded. Then we find another way. We save Rourke without surrendering the proof. *2. The city turns on its own. Back in the city, the atmosphere had shifted. The repository was under increased security, its staff acting like prisoners in their own workplace. The police presence was heavier, and the mayor's office issued statements denying any wrongdoing, calling the accusations baseless and politically motivated. We began to build our case in secret. Professor Soren contacted other historians, lawyers, and journalists who had been marginalized for questioning the city's history. We gathered copies of documents, authenticated the ring, and prepared a legal challenge that would force the city to produce the Ashen Ledger. But the city fought back. Witnesses withdrew, intimidated by threats or promises. The media downplayed the story, treating it as a dispute over archives rather than a criminal conspiracy. The police refused to investigate Rourke's disappearance, insisting he was a suspect. Mara and I moved through the city like ghosts, careful not to be seen together too often. We used coded messages, safe houses, and trusted allies. The ring remained hidden, but the threat was constant. Then we received another message, this time from Rourke himself. It was short, written in his tight hand. The ledger is in the old courthouse vault. Moving it tonight. Don't come alone. Mara's eyes went to me. We can't wait. We planned the operation carefully. Professor Soren arranged for a legal observer to accompany us, and a small group of allies agreed to provide cover. The courthouse was a stone building from the city's early days, its vault sealed with mechanisms that matched the repository's. We arrived at dusk, the streets quiet. The courthouse was lit from within, but the vault entrance was in the basement, accessible through a side door. We moved quickly, keeping to the shadows. Inside, the basement was cold, the air heavy with damp stone. The vault door was large, its iron surface scarred by time. Mara produced the keys Rourke had given her, keys that matched the repository's old seals. The door opened with a reluctant creak. The vault was a long chamber lined with shelves. The Ashen Ledger lay on a table, the leather cover darkened with age. The broken ring symbol was stamped on the spine. But the room was not empty. A figure stood beside the ledger holding a gun. It was Harlan Quell ***, the city clerk, his face calm, his eyes cold. Behind him stood several officers, their uniforms crisp, their expressions blank. Quell's voice was controlled. You shouldn't have come. Mara stepped forward. We're here for the truth. Quell's gaze flicked to the ledger. The truth is what the city says it is. I moved, trying to keep my voice steady. Rourke is alive. We know you're holding him. Let him go. Quell's expression didn't change. Rourke is a criminal. He stole city property. He's being dealt with. Mara's eyes went to the ledger. That ledger doesn't belong to the city. It belongs to the people. The ring proves it. Quell's hand tightened on the gun. "The ring is irrelevant. The city will rewrite the record. You can't stop it." At that moment the lights flickered. A sound echoed from the corridor, voices, movement. Our allies had arrived, creating a distraction. The officers turned, momentarily confused. Mara lunged toward the ledger, but Quell stepped in her way. I moved to intercept him, but he was faster. He grabbed the ledger and backed toward the exit. Mara shouted, "Elias!" From the shadows, Rourke appeared, his wrists bound but his expression fierce. He had escaped or been allowed to move. Either way, he was here. He tackled Quell, the ledger falling to the ground. The officers reacted, but our allies flooded the basement, forcing them back. The struggle was chaotic but brief. Quell was restrained, the ledger secured. Rourke's eyes went to Mara. "The ring," he said, "is it safe?" Mara nodded, her breath quick. "It's safe." We left the courthouse with the ledger, the ring, and Rourke, our proof intact. The city's machine had been disrupted, but the war was far from over. The trial of the city's memory. *1. The evidence that refuses to die. The days that followed were a blur of preparation, secrecy, and constant vigilance. The city's response was swift. Quell was released on bail. The police issued statements that portrayed us as criminals, and the media framed the story as a dispute between archivists and city officials. The founding families tightened their control, using their influence to isolate witnesses and suppress the truth. But the Ashen Ledger and the Iron Ring could not be easily dismissed. Professor Soren assembled a team of historians, forensic document examiners, and legal experts to authenticate the documents. The broken ring symbol was matched to the ring's impression, the ink, the pressure, evidence that the alterations were deliberate. Mara and I worked with Rourke to build a case that went beyond the ledger. We traced the chain of alterations through decades, identifying the key figures who had benefited: land claims, zoning changes, contracts, and access rights that had been rewritten to consolidate power. The legal battle began with a motion to compel the city to produce the original records. The city fought it, arguing that the repository's documents were internal and not subject to public scrutiny. The court hearings became a public spectacle, with crowds gathering, journalists reporting, and the city trying to paint us as radicals. Rourke testified first, his voice steady as he described the fraud, the threats, and the murder of the archivist, his colleague, who had tried to protect the ledger. His testimony carried weight because it was specific, detailed, and corroborated by the documents. Mara testified next, explaining the broken ring symbol, the authentication process, and the systematic nature of the alterations. Her credibility as an archivist was undeniable, and the city's attempts to discredit her failed. Then Professor Soren presented the ring and the ledger, demonstrating the physical proof of the fraud. The court watched as the experts verified the symbol, the seals, and the timeline of changes. The city's attorneys tried to argue that the ring was a forgery, that the ledger was unreliable, and that the accusations were politically motivated. But the evidence was too strong, and the court ordered the city to produce the original records for a full audit. The ruling was a victory, but it was only the beginning. The city responded with intimidation. Witnesses were pressured, allies were threatened, and the case became a war. *2. The price of truth. Rourke's freedom was conditional. The city charged him with theft and obstruction, but the court released him on bail, recognizing the broader conspiracy. He moved between safe houses, constantly watched, constantly hunted. Mara returned to the repository under strict supervision, but she continued her work in secret, documenting the remaining alterations and preserving the truth. The broken ring symbol became a rallying point for others who had been harmed by the rewritten agreements: landowners, tenants, and citizens who had been pushed out of their own city. The trial expanded into a public reckoning. The founding families were forced to answer questions about their influence, their control of records, and their role in the fraud. The case exposed not just the altered agreements, but the culture of silence that had allowed them to continue for generations. Then the threats escalated. A fire broke out in a records building connected to the repository. An accident, the city claimed, but the timing was too convenient. Documents were destroyed and the remaining evidence was endangered. Mara and I moved quickly, securing the most critical records and transferring them to a secure location. The ring remained hidden, its existence known only to a small circle of trusted allies. Rourke received another message: "Bring the ring, last warning." Mara's eyes were determined. "We're not giving it to them." I agreed. "Then we end this." We planned a final confrontation. Professor Sorin arranged for a public hearing, a forum where the evidence could be presented openly. The city would be forced to respond, and the truth would be exposed to the light. The hearing took place in the old courthouse, the same building where we had recovered the ledger. The room was filled with citizens, journalists, lawyers, and historians. The atmosphere was tense, the air charged with expectation. Rourke testified again, this time with the ledger and the ring on display. The experts authenticated the evidence, and the timeline of alterations was laid bare. The city's attorneys tried to interrupt, but the court refused to silence the truth. Quell was called to testify. His expression was controlled, but his eyes flicked toward the exits. The pressure was visible. Then, in the midst of the proceedings, a figure stood from the crowd, someone who had been silent, someone who had benefited the most from the rewritten records. Varan Asterisk, the head of the founding family, stepped forward, his presence commanding the room. His voice was calm. "This spectacle ends now." Mara stood, her voice firm. "It ends when the truth is acknowledged." Varan's gaze went to the ring. "That ring is a relic. It has no legal authority." Professor Sorin stepped forward. "It has the authority of authenticity. It proves the agreements were altered. It proves the city's history has been rewritten." Varan's expression hardened. "Then you're mistaken." At that moment the lights went out. A commotion erupted, people shouting, chairs scraping. When the lights returned, the ring was gone. Mara's breath caught. "No." Rourke moved quickly, scanning the room. Varan was still standing, his expression calm, but his eyes were triumphant. The court descended into chaos. The hearing was adjourned, the evidence secured, but the ring, the proof, was missing. *3, the final reckoning. Mara and I knew the ring had been taken by someone in the room, someone connected to Varan. The city's machine had struck again, this time in public. We began a new investigation, tracking the theft, identifying the people who had been in the room, and building a case against the perpetrators. There was not just an object, it was the key to the entire fraud, and whoever had it would try to destroy it. Rourke's determination hardened. "They can't erase the truth," he said, "not if we're willing to pay the price." We followed the trail, using the remaining evidence, the authenticated documents, and the testimony of witnesses who had been harmed. The city's narrative began to crack, and the public began to demand answers. Then, in a final confrontation, we found the ring again, hidden in the city's original vault, the same place where the Ashen Ledger had once been stored. Varan and his allies had tried to bury it, but the truth refused to stay hidden. The court issued a final ruling. The altered agreements were declared fraudulent, the original records were restored, and the founding families were held accountable. The city's history was rewritten again, this time with honesty. Rourke returned to the repository, his role restored. Mara became the guardian of the city's true records, and I left the city, knowing that the Ashen Ledger would stand as a reminder that the past can be altered, but it can also be reclaimed. The broken ring symbol remained on the ledger's spine, a promise that the truth, once found, cannot be erased. The vault beneath the public eye asterisk. ***1. After the hearing, the city closes its fists. The courthouse emptied in a slow exhale. People moved like they were stepping out of a storm, blinking against daylight that felt too ordinary for what they had just witnessed. The ring was gone, stolen from under the court's own watch, and the air still carried the sharp aftertaste of that moment. Voices cut off mid-sentence, lights snapping out, the collective breath of a room realizing it had been played. Mara stood near the dais where the Ashen Ledger had been displayed, her hands empty now, her expression controlled but brittle. The ledger itself was back in the court's custody, but custody was not safety. The court was a building, not a promise. The city's founding families had proven they could reach into any room and take what mattered. Rourke stood beside her, his posture tense, eyes scanning the crowd. He looked less like the archivist who had quietly protected the city's memory and more like a man who understood what it cost to be hunted. "They didn't just steal the ring," he said. "They took the story." I stood at the edge of the room, watching the exits. Varon had left with the crowd, calm, unhurried, too calm. His departure had felt like a verdict. The city had chosen its narrative. Professor Livia Sorin approached us, her face drawn with fatigue. "We have a narrow window," she said. "The court will demand an investigation, but the city will delay it. They'll say the theft was incidental, that the ring is irrelevant, that the hearing disrupted the process. They'll try to bury this again." Mara's eyes flicked to the ledger. "They can't bury the ledger, it's evidence." Sorin's voice was quiet. "Evidence only matters if it's protected. If the court can't guarantee chain of custody, they can argue the ledger's authenticity is compromised." Rourke's jaw tightened. "Then we don't leave it here." We moved quickly. With the help of a court clerk sympathetic to the truth, an older woman who had seen the city's records manipulated for years, we arranged for the ledger to be transferred to a secure location, a university archive under Sorin's supervision, with additional protections from the legal team. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step away from the city's direct control. Outside, the city looked deceptively normal. The harbor glittered, the lighthouse stood tall, and the streets were busy with the usual commerce. But the normalcy felt staged, as if everyone was performing for an audience. People glanced at us, then away, as if making eye contact would mark them. Mara and I returned to a safe house Rourke had prepared, a small apartment above a bookstore near the university, chosen because it had multiple exits and a landlord who refused to ask questions. The place smelled of paper and coffee, and the walls were lined with books that had been rescued from old collections. Mara set the documents we had salvaged on a table and began working again, her fingers moving with purpose. "The ring is the key," she said. "Without it, the fraud can be explained away as clerical error. With it, the alterations become intentional." Rourke paced, his expression controlled. "They know that. That's why they took it. They'll try to destroy it or use it to control us." I looked at the list of names we had compiled, Varon, Quell, and others connected to the founding families. "Then we need to understand the chain," I said. "Who benefits, who profits, and who is willing to commit murder to keep the records hidden." Mara's eyes went to a document from the earliest settlement period. The broken ring symbol was clear, stamped beside signatures. "This isn't just about land," she said. "It's about legitimacy. The city's entire origin story is built on these agreements. If the original record is proven fraudulent, the city's legal foundation starts to crack." Rourke's voice was grim, "And they'll do anything to prevent that." A knock sounded at the door, sharp, controlled. Mara froze. Rourke moved to the window, scanning the street. I stepped to the door, listening. The knock came again, then silence. I opened the door a crack. A young woman stood there, rain-damp hair clinging to her face. Her eyes were wide, her expression urgent. "Professor Sorin sent me," she said. "They're moving against the university archive tonight. You need to come now." Mara's breath quickened. The ledger. We left immediately, moving through the city in a careful pattern. Back streets, service alleys, and the long walkways that connected the university to the older parts of the city. The rain had returned, turning the stone slick, the air cold. The university archive was a secure facility, but security could be compromised. When we arrived, the entrance was calm, the staff going about their usual work. But the calm felt like a cover. Professor Soren met us in the reading room, her expression tight. "They've been asking questions," she said. "They're trying to gain access. They're using official channels, requests, warrants, pressure from the mayor's office. They're trying to make the ledger disappear again." Mara's voice was urgent. "We need to move it." Soren nodded. "We already have a secondary location, a secure research facility inland, but we can't move it without authorization. The city will claim theft." Rourke's eyes were hard. "Then we create authorization. We get a court order. We get witnesses. We get the ledger out before they take it." We began working immediately, contacting lawyers, filing motions, and assembling a team of witnesses who could testify to the chain of custody. The process was slow, bureaucratic, and vulnerable to interference. Every hour felt like a countdown. That night, as we waited for the court's response, the archive's security system triggered an alert. A breach attempt, someone trying to access the vault. The staff responded quickly, but the attempt confirmed what we feared. The city was acting. Mara and I returned to the safe house, exhausted but alert. Rourke stayed at the archive, coordinating the response and ensuring the ledger was protected. The next morning, the court issued a temporary order. The ledger was to remain in the university archive under strict supervision, and a formal audit was to begin immediately. It was a victory, but it felt fragile. Then the first sign of retaliation came. A public statement from the city clerk's office, dismissing the fraud allegations as academic conjecture and accusing us of manipulating historical records for political purposes. The media picked up the narrative, and the public began to doubt the story. Mara's face went pale. "They're rewriting the story before they rewrite the records." Rourke's voice was controlled. "Then we need the ring back. Without it, they can control the narrative." We began a new investigation, this time focused on the theft. We interviewed witnesses from the hearing, reviewed security footage, and built a timeline of the moment the lights went out. The footage was incomplete, the room crowded, but we found a pattern. The ring had been taken by someone who knew the room, who moved with confidence, and who had access to the courthouse's internal systems. Mara's eyes narrowed. This wasn't random, this was planned. Rourke nodded. "And the person who planned it is connected to Varon." We identified a suspect, Tessa Riven ***, a courthouse records clerk with ties to the founding families. She had access, motive, and the ability to manipulate the room systems, but we couldn't prove it yet. Mara and I decided to approach her directly, carefully. We arranged a meeting in a public place, an old cafe near the waterfront, where the city's history was visible in the architecture and the quiet rituals of daily life. Tessa arrived, her expression guarded. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Mara's voice was steady. "We know you took the ring." Tessa's eyes flicked around the cafe. "I didn't take anything." Rourke stepped forward, his presence controlled. "We know the chain. We know who you work for. We know what they're doing to the records. Give us the ring and we can protect you." Tessa's expression tightened. "You can't protect me. They'll destroy me." Mara leaned closer. "They're already destroying the city. The ring is the proof. If it's gone, they win." Tessa hesitated, then slid a small cloth-wrapped object across the table. "Don't say I gave it to you." Mara unwrapped the cloth. The iron ring lay there, the broken symbol clear. Relief flooded through me, but it was tempered by the danger of what we had just done. Tessa stood quickly. "Leave now, they're watching." We left the cafe, the ring secure, but the moment felt like a trap. The city was waiting. ***2, the city's counterattack. Back at the safe house, we examined the ring again. It was the same object, the same symbol, but the moment felt different. It wasn't just evidence, it was a weapon, and the city would do anything to take it back. Mara and I began to prepare for the next phase, a public presentation that would force the city to confront the truth. Professor Soren arranged for a second hearing, this time with international observers and a broader legal team. The goal was to make the fraud impossible to dismiss. But the city responded with force. The night before the hearing, the university archive security system failed, an apparent malfunction, but the timing was too perfect. The staff discovered that the ledger had been moved, its location uncertain. Mara's face went pale. They took it again. Rourke's voice was controlled. Then we find it before they destroy it. We launched a search, working with the archive staff and the legal team. The trail led to the courthouse vault, again. The city was using its own institutions to hide the truth, moving the evidence from one controlled space to another. We arrived at the courthouse, the building quiet. The basement vault was sealed, but Mara had the keys. We opened the door and found the Ashen Ledger on a table, the broken ring symbol visible. But the room was not empty. Varen stood beside the ledger, his expression calm. Behind him were officers, their uniforms crisp, their faces blank. Quell stood nearby, his eyes cold. Varen's voice was controlled. "You're out of time." Mara stepped forward. "This ledger belongs to the city's people. The ring proves the agreements are fraudulent." Varen's gaze went to the ring in Mara's hand. "That ring is irrelevant. The city has decided the record." Rourke's voice was steady. "The court has ordered the audit. The truth will come out." Varen's expression hardened. "Not if you're silenced." At that moment the lights flickered. A commotion erupted from the corridor, our allies creating a distraction. The officers turned, momentarily confused. Mara and I moved toward the ledger, but Quell stepped in our way. Rourke engaged him, buying us time. I grabbed the ledger and Mara clutched the ring. We ran, the basement stretching into darkness. The officers pursued us, but our allies held them back. We reached the exit and fled into the night, the city's lights fading behind us. We escaped to the lighthouse keeper's cottage again, the same place where we had hidden before. The ledger and the ring were secure. But the city was not finished. The war for the city's memory had only just begun. Chapter 6, The Memory Market. 1. The city learns to fear the past. The lighthouse keeper's cottage felt like a sanctuary and a trap at once. The sea crashed against the cliffs below, a constant reminder that the city's control did not extend everywhere. Inside, the air smelled of damp stone and old paper, and the Ashen Ledger sat on the table like a living thing, its leather worn, its pages brittle, its broken ring symbol a mark of defiance. Mara worked methodically, comparing the ledger to the altered documents we had gathered. The fraud was not just a few mistakes. It was a long campaign of rewriting, names removed, dates changed, boundaries shifted, and clauses inserted that turned public land into private profit. The ledger showed the city as it had been promised, a shared civic agreement. The current records showed a city that had been reshaped into an inheritance. Rourke paced near the window, watching the road. "They'll come for us," he said. "They can't let this stand." I looked at the ring, resting beside the ledger. "They'll come for the ring first," I said, "because it's the proof they can't explain away." Mara's eyes were determined. "Then we don't keep it here, we distribute it. We make it impossible to destroy." Professor Soren arrived that afternoon, bringing a small team of experts, historians, forensic document examiners, and a legal observer. They began the process of authentication again, this time with meticulous care, matching the ring's impression to the ledger's seals, documenting the ink, the pressure, and the physical marks of time. The work was slow, but it was the only way to make the truth undeniable. Soren's voice was quiet. "This isn't just about the city," she said. This is about the idea that records can be trusted. If they can rewrite the founding agreements, they can rewrite anything: contracts, laws, even the stories people tell about themselves. Rourke's expression hardened. Then we take the fight public. We began to build a broader case, reaching out to journalists, advocacy groups, and citizens who had been harmed by the rewritten agreements. The story spread beyond the city, gaining attention from national outlets. The city's narrative of a simple administrative dispute began to collapse. But the city fought back. Varon and his allies used their influence to isolate us, threatening witnesses, controlling the police response, and flooding the media with counterstories. The mayor issued statements denying wrongdoing, and the courts delayed the audit. Mara and I moved between safe houses, careful not to be seen together too often. The ring was kept hidden, passed between trusted allies, its existence known only to a small circle. The ledger remained in a secure facility, protected by legal oversight. Then the threats escalated. A fire broke out in a records building near the university, an accident, the city claimed, but the timing was too convenient. Documents were destroyed, and the remaining evidence was endangered. Rourke received another message: "Bring the ring, final warning." Mara's eyes were steady. "We're not giving it to them." I agreed. "Then we end this." We planned a final confrontation. Professor Sorin arranged for a public forum, an international symposium on archival integrity, where the evidence could be presented openly. The city would be forced to respond, and the truth would be exposed. The symposium took place in a large hall, filled with scholars, journalists, lawyers, and citizens. The atmosphere was charged, the air thick with expectation. The Ashen Ledger and the ring were displayed under strict security, and the experts presented their findings. Rourke testified, his voice calm but urgent. He described the fraud, the threats, and the murder of the archivist who had tried to protect the ledger. His testimony carried the weight of lived experience, not just academic theory. Mara explained the broken ring symbol, the authentication process, and the systematic nature of the alterations. Her credibility as an archivist was undeniable. The experts demonstrated the physical proof. The ring matched the seals, the ink, the pressure, evidence that the records had been altered deliberately. The city's attorneys tried to interrupt, but the court-appointed observers refused to silence the truth. Varon and Quell were forced to sit in the room, their expressions controlled, their presence a reminder of the power they still held. Then, in the midst of the proceedings, a figure stood from the crowd, someone who had been silent, someone who had benefited the most from the rewritten records. Varon stepped forward, his presence commanding the room. His voice was calm. "This spectacle ends now." Mara stood, her voice firm. "It ends when the truth is acknowledged." Varon's gaze went to the ring. "That ring is a relic. It has no legal authority." Professor Sorin stepped forward. "It has the authority of authenticity. It proves the agreements were altered. It proves the city's history has been rewritten." Varon's expression hardened. "Then you're mistaken." At that moment the lights went out again. A commotion erupted, people shouting, chairs scraping. When the lights returned, the ring was gone. Mara's breath caught. "No." Rourke moved quickly, scanning the room. Varon was still standing, his expression calm, but his eyes were triumphant. The symposium descended into chaos. The evidence was secured, but the ring, the proof, was missing again. *2, the final price and the final promise. The city's response was immediate: arrests, intimidation, and a narrative that portrayed us as criminals. The police issued warrants, and the media framed the story as a conspiracy. The founding families tightened their control, using their influence to isolate witnesses. But the truth could not be erased completely. The authenticated ledger, the documented alterations, and the testimony of witnesses created a record that could not be easily dismissed. The public began to demand answers, and the courts were forced to act. Mara and I followed the trail, using the remaining evidence and the support of allies. We discovered that the ring had been moved to the city's original vault, the same place where the Ashen Ledger had once been stored. Venn and his allies had tried to bury it, but the truth refused to stay hidden. In a final confrontation, we recovered the ring. The court issued a ruling. The altered agreements were declared fraudulent, the original records were restored, and the founding families were held accountable. The city's history was rewritten again, this time with honesty. Rourke returned to the repository, his role restored. Mara became the guardian of the city's true records, and I left the city, knowing that the Ashen Ledger would stand as a reminder that the past can be altered, but it can also be reclaimed. The broken ring symbol remained on the ledger's spine, a promise that the truth, once found, cannot be erased. The city learns to fear the light asterisk. **1. The aftermath of the symposium, a city on guard. The symposium ended not with resolution, but with a collective shockwave. The ring was gone again, taken in a moment of orchestrated darkness, yet the room did not simply return to normal. People left with the ledger's truth lodged in their minds. The city had not been built on a stable civic promise, but on a long campaign of rewriting. The broken ring symbol, once a quiet mark in the margins, now stood as a public accusation. Mara and I moved through the hall in the wake of the chaos, scanning faces, trying to identify the thief without creating panic. The crowd thinned quickly. Journalists pressed forward, lawyers argued, and citizens murmured, some in outrage, others in fear. The founding family's influence was not only legal, it was social, and people understood what it meant to be seen asking the wrong questions. Professor Livia Sorin stood beside the Ashen Ledger, her expression controlled but urgent. "They're not just trying to hide the ring," she said. "They're trying to redefine what counts as evidence. If the public accepts that the ledger can be moved, questioned, or discredited, the fraud wins by default." Rourke joined us, eyes scanning the exits. "They'll isolate us," he said. "They'll make it personal. They'll turn us into suspects, agitators, thieves. That's how they win." I looked at the ledger. Its leather spine bore the broken ring symbol, the mark of authenticity. "Then we don't let them isolate us," I said. "We make the truth visible enough that it can't be contained." Mara's voice was steady. "We distribute the proof. We authenticate it with witnesses. We make the chain of custody impossible to break." We began immediately. Sorin arranged for the ledger to be moved to a secure inland facility with international oversight, a research archive that specialized in historical preservation and had the legal standing to resist local intimidation. The transfer required court orders, documentation, and a convoy, small, deliberate, and watched. The city tried to delay it, but the public attention made it harder to stall. Meanwhile, Mara and I worked to reconstruct the theft. The symposium security footage was incomplete, but we built a timeline. The lights went out in a coordinated sequence, the ring was taken in the brief interval, and the room's confusion was exploited by someone who knew the building's systems. The most likely suspect was *Tessa Riven ***. The courthouse records clerk with ties to the founding families, but she had disappeared after our cafe meeting. The city had made her vanish. Rourke's expression darkened. "They're not just hiding the ring, they're hiding the people who know where it is." Mara's eyes went to the ledger again. "Then we build the case without the ring for now. We prove the alterations using the ledger and the authenticated documents. The ring is the final proof, but it's not the only proof." We spent the next days assembling a comprehensive record. Copies of the original agreements, the altered deeds, the timeline of changes, and the testimony of witnesses who had been harmed by the rewritten records. The case expanded beyond the ledger into the lived history of the city: land taken, families displaced, permits denied, and promises broken. The city responded with a campaign of intimidation. Witnesses withdrew, citing fear of retaliation. The police began to investigate us, treating our actions as obstruction and theft. The media shifted from curiosity to skepticism, repeating the city's narrative. A dispute over archives, a political stunt, a misunderstanding of routine corrections. Mara and I moved between safe houses, careful not to be seen together too often. The stress began to show. Mara's hands trembled when she handled documents and her eyes kept scanning doorways. I felt the same vigilance, the same sense of being watched. The city had become a surveillance machine. Then a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sella Klein, the retired records clerk who had once sheltered us. She contacted us through a secure channel, her voice urgent. "They're moving the ring," she said. "I overheard them. They're taking it to the original vault beneath the repository. They're going to destroy it or use it to rewrite the record again." Mara's breath caught. The original vault. Rourke's eyes narrowed. That's the place where the ledger was first stored. That's the place where the broken ring symbol was made. We planned the operation carefully. The original vault beneath the repository was a sealed chamber that had been built to preserve the city's founding agreements. It was protected by old mechanisms, but we had the keys Rourke had given Mara, keys that matched the seals. The risk was enormous, but the opportunity was clear. If we could recover the ring, we could force the city to confront the truth. That night we moved through the repository like ghosts. The building was quiet, its corridors lit only by emergency lights. Security had increased, but the old architecture created blind spots, service corridors, maintenance tunnels, and the long passageways that connected the repository to the lighthouse and the original vault. We descended into the basement, the air growing colder. The original vault door stood before us, its iron surface scarred by time. Mara produced the keys, and the mechanism clicked open with a reluctant sound. Inside the vault was a stone chamber lined with shelves, sealed with iron. The air smelled of dust and time. And there, resting on a velvet cloth, was the iron ring. Mara's breath caught. We found it. But the moment of relief was short-lived. A figure stepped from the shadows, a dark coat, a hat obscuring the face. The figure held a gun. "Put it down," the voice said. Mara's eyes widened. "Tessa." The figure removed the hat. It was Tessa Riven, her face thin, her eyes tired, her expression controlled. "You shouldn't have come," she said. Rourke stepped forward, his voice steady. "Tessa, they're using you. They're destroying the city." Tessa's gaze flicked to the ring. "They're protecting the city. The ledger is the only thing that proves the fraud. If it's gone, the city can continue as it always has." Mara's voice was urgent. "The city is built on a lie. People have been harmed. Land has been stolen. If you destroy the ring, you destroy the proof." Tessa's expression tightened. "I don't have a choice." At that moment, the vault door opened again. Varon stepped into the chamber, his presence commanding. Behind him were officers, their uniforms crisp, their faces blank. Varon's voice was controlled. "This ends now." Mara stepped back, clutching the ring. "You can't rewrite the record forever." Varon's eyes went to the ring. "We already have. The public will believe what we tell them. The courts will do what we allow." Rourke's voice was hard. "Not this time." The officers moved quickly, restraining us. Tessa stood frozen, her eyes flicking between us and Varon. The city's machine had her trapped. Varon approached the ring, his hand reaching out. "Give it to me." Mara held it tighter. "No." Varon's expression hardened. "Then you leave me no choice." A signal passed between him and the officers. The restraint tightened and Mara was forced to release the ring. Varon took it, his gaze triumphant. He turned to Tessa. "Destroy it." Tessa hesitated, then stepped toward a small furnace built into the vault, an old mechanism used for destroying compromised documents. The heat glowed, and the air turned sharp. Mara's voice broke. "Don't." Tessa's eyes were filled with conflict. "I'm sorry," she whispered. But at that moment the vault's emergency alarm sounded. The sound was sudden, piercing. The officers turned, momentarily distracted. Rourke moved with purpose, breaking free of his restraints and lunging toward the furnace. He grabbed the ring from Tessa's hand and threw it across the room, away from the heat. The officers reacted, but our allies, who had followed us creating a distraction, flooded the vault. The struggle was chaotic, brief. Varen was restrained, the ring secured. We fled the repository, the city's lights fading behind us. The ring was back in our possession, and the truth was still alive. *2. The final campaign, turning evidence into public power. Back at the secure inland facility, the Ashen Ledger and the Iron Ring were placed under international oversight. The experts authenticated the ring again, matching it to the ledger's seals, the ink, and the physical marks of time. The proof was undeniable. Mara and I began the final phase, turning the evidence into a public case that the city could not dismiss. We worked with journalists, historians, lawyers, and advocacy groups to build a narrative that was not just about archives, but about the lived experience of the city: land taken, promises broken, and a history rewritten. The court proceedings began again, this time with the ring as the centerpiece of the case. The city fought back, trying to discredit the evidence, intimidate witnesses, and delay the process. But the public attention made it harder to control the story. Rourke testified again, his voice steady as he described the fraud, the threats, and the murder of the archivist who had tried to protect the ledger. His testimony carried the weight of lived experience, not just academic theory. Mara explained the broken ring symbol, the authentication process, and the systematic nature of the alterations. Her credibility as an archivist was undeniable. The experts demonstrated the physical proof. The ring matched the seals, the ink, the pressure, evidence that the records had been altered deliberately. The city's attorneys tried to argue that the ring was a forgery, that the ledger was unreliable, and that the accusations were politically motivated. But the evidence was too strong, and the court ordered a full audit of the city's records. The ruling was a victory, but it was only the beginning. The city responded with intimidation. Witnesses were pressured, allies were threatened, and the case became a war. Then, in a final act of defiance, the court issued an order. The original Ashen Ledger was to be returned to the repository, and the city's records were to be corrected and made public. The founding families were held accountable, and the city began to rebuild its history with honesty. Rourke returned to the repository, his role restored. Mara became the guardian of the city's true records, and I left the city, knowing that the Ashen Ledger would stand as a reminder that the past can be altered, but it can also be reclaimed. The broken ring symbol remained on the ledger's spine, a promise that the truth, once found, cannot be erased. Chapter 8, The Ledger's Promise *1, The City After the Reckoning. The city did not change overnight. The harbor still glittered, the lighthouse still stood tall, and the streets still carried the usual commerce. But the air felt different, less like a closed story and more like a place that had been reopened. The Ashen Ledger was back where it belonged, its broken ring symbol a public mark of authenticity, and the rewritten agreements had been corrected. Mara returned to the repository with a new mandate: to preserve the truth, not just the records. The building itself felt transformed, as if the silence had been broken. Staff members who had once lived in fear began to speak more freely, and the city's institutions started to function with a new sense of accountability. Rourke took a position as the city's chief archivist, not just a guardian of documents but a witness to the truth. His work became more than preservation. It became protection of the record, of the people, and of the idea that history could be trusted. I left the city, but I did not leave the case behind. The Ashen Ledger had become part of me, and the broken ring symbol had become a promise I could not ignore. The city's story was no longer hidden, it was visible, and it was mine to carry. In the months that followed, the legal consequences unfolded. The founding families were investigated, contracts were reviewed, and the city began to repair the harm done by the rewritten agreements. The process was slow, bureaucratic, and painful, but it was real. Mara and I stayed in contact, exchanging updates, documents, and the quiet knowledge that the truth had been reclaimed. The ring remained in a secure location, a living proof that the city's history could be restored. One day, Mara sent me a message, a photograph of the Ashen Ledger, its broken ring symbol clear, and a note that read, "The truth is safe." I understood what it meant. The city's memory had been saved, not just for the present but for the future. *2. The final truth. The mystery of the Ashen Ledger was not just about stolen documents and a missing ring. It was about the idea that history can be rewritten by those who control the record, and that the only way to stop it is to make the truth visible, accountable, and permanent. The broken ring symbol stood as a reminder that the past is not fixed, it is a promise. And when that promise is broken, it must be repaired. The Ashen Ledger. Final movement, the trial of the record. *1. The city prepares for war. The days after the symposium felt like the city holding its breath. The ring had been recovered once, stolen again, and recovered again, each time a reminder that the founding families were not only litigating a case, they were defending a machine. The Ashen Ledger was now under international oversight, its broken ring symbol authenticated by multiple experts and protected by a chain of custody that could not be easily undone. Yet the city's response was not to surrender, it was to tighten its control. Mara returned to the repository under new rules, more security, more supervision, and a public narrative that treated her work as administrative revision rather than evidence of fraud. The building felt different, less a sanctuary and more a contested space. Staff members spoke in lowered voices. Documents were moved with ceremony. Every box became a political act. Rourke took his place as chief archivist with the same quiet authority he had always carried, but now it had an edge. He was no longer just preserving history, he was enforcing it. He established new protocols, dual custody, mandatory documentation, public access schedules, and a standing audit committee that included historians, lawyers, and citizen observers. The changes weren't just procedural. They were a declaration that the repository belonged to the people, not the founding families. I remained in the city, not because it felt safe, but because it felt unfinished. The case had become larger than the ledger. It was a question of whether the city's institutions could be trusted to remember the truth. The threats had not stopped. Witnesses were pressured. Allies were followed. The media's tone shifted toward skepticism, repeating the city's message that the dispute was an overreach by archivists and outsiders. Then the summons arrived. The court had scheduled a full evidentiary hearing. The city's attorneys filed motions to exclude the ring, to dismiss the ledger as unreliable, and to limit testimony. The fight was moving into the formal arena where power usually wins. Mara and I met with Professor Elias Rourke and the legal team in a secure conference room near the university. The air smelled of coffee and paper. The table was covered with documents, original agreements, altered deeds, the timeline of changes, and the authenticated impressions of the broken ring symbol. Soren's voice was controlled. "This is not a trial about a ledger," she said. "It's a trial about whether the city can rewrite its origin story. If the court accepts the alterations as routine corrections, the fraud becomes permanent." Rourke's eyes went to the ring, resting in a protective case. And the ring is the only thing that makes the fraud undeniable. Without it, they'll argue that the symbol is incidental, that the ledger is ambiguous, that the changes are ordinary. I looked at the names on our witness list, citizens harmed by the rewritten agreements, historians who had been marginalized, and the few remaining staff members who had seen the fraud firsthand. "Then we don't rely on the court alone," I said. "We make the truth public. We make the record visible. We make it impossible for them to bury this again." Mara nodded. "We take it to the people." We began to prepare a public presentation, exhibits, expert testimony, and a narrative that connected the ledger to the lived history of the city. The goal was to shift the case from a technical dispute into a moral reckoning. The founding families had built their power on the idea that history belonged to them. We would prove it belonged to everyone. The city responded with a counter-campaign, threats, intimidation, and a media narrative that portrayed us as radicals trying to destabilize the city. The police began to investigate our movements, treating our actions as obstruction. The mayor issued statements denying wrongdoing and calling the accusations baseless. Then a new threat emerged, Tessa Riven ***. She had disappeared after the repository confrontation, but rumors began to surface, whispers that she was being held, coerced, or being used to deliver a message. Mara's face tightened at the mention of her name. "They're not just protecting the record," she said. "They're protecting the people who can testify against them." Rourke's voice was grim. "Then we find her before they destroy her." We launched a search, using the remaining evidence, the support of allies, and the network of people who had been harmed by the rewritten agreements. The trail was difficult, but it led to a pattern. Tessa had been moved between controlled locations, her access to the city's records used as leverage. The founding families were not just hiding documents, they were hiding witnesses. **2. The courtroom as a battlefield. The hearing began in the old courthouse, the same building where we had recovered the ledger and where the ring had been stolen. The room was packed. Citizens, journalists, lawyers, historians, and observers from national organizations. The atmosphere was tense, the air charged with expectation. The city's attorneys opened with a strategy designed to narrow the case. They argued that the ledger was a historical artifact, not a legal document, and that the broken ring symbol was a convention rather than a seal of authenticity. They tried to frame the entire dispute as academic disagreement, not fraud. Mara testified first, her voice steady as she explained the broken ring symbol, the authentication process, and the systematic nature of the alterations. She described the repository's procedures, the chain of custody, and the deliberate changes that had turned public land into private profit. Her credibility as an archivist was undeniable, and the city's attempts to discredit her failed. Rourke testified next, his testimony carrying the weight of lived experience. He described the murder of the archivist who had tried to protect the ledger, the threats he had received, and the long campaign to rewrite the city's records. His words were specific, detailed, and corroborated by the documents. Professor Sorin presented the Ashen Ledger and the iron ring, demonstrating the physical proof. The ring matched the seals, the ink, the pressure, evidence that the records had been altered deliberately. The court watched as experts authenticated the symbol, the timeline of changes, and the pattern of fraud. The city's attorneys tried to argue that the ring was a forgery, that the ledger was unreliable, and that the accusations were politically motivated. But the evidence was too strong, and the court allowed the full record to be entered. Then the city made its move. They called **Varon** to testify. His presence commanded the room, his voice calm, his expression controlled. He denied wrongdoing, dismissed the ring as irrelevant, and portrayed the case as a political attack on the city's stability. Mara stood, her voice firm. "The ring is not irrelevant, it is the proof. The ledger is the original record. The changes are not corrections, they are theft." Varon's expression hardened. "The city has decided its history. The courts will do what they must." At that moment the lights went out again, briefly, but enough to create a ripple of uncertainty. A commotion erupted, people shouting, chairs scraping. When the lights returned, the ring was gone from its protective case. Mara's breath caught. No. The court descended into chaos. The judge ordered the room secured, the exits monitored, and the theft investigated. But the damage was done. The city had demonstrated that it could still control the narrative, even in the courtroom. Rourke's eyes went to the ledger. They're not just taking the ring, they're trying to make the record unprovable. Mara's voice was urgent. Then we don't stop, we prove it without the ring. We began to rebuild the case using the authenticated ledger, the documented alterations, and the testimony of witnesses who had been harmed. The city's narrative of a simple administrative dispute began to crack, and the public began to demand answers. Then a breakthrough came. A witness came forward, a courthouse clerk who had seen Tessa Riven being moved between controlled locations. The witness provided details, dates, and the names of the people involved. The city's machine had a weakness. It needed people to carry out its orders, and people could be persuaded to speak. We located Tessa in a secure facility, her freedom restricted, her access to records used as leverage. Mara and I met with her in a controlled setting, with legal counsel present. Tessa's eyes were tired, her expression conflicted. "They told me I would lose everything," she said. "They said the city would destroy me if I didn't cooperate." Mara's voice was gentle but firm. "They're destroying the city. The ring is the proof. If it's gone, they win." Tessa hesitated, then provided the location where the ring had been moved. The city's original vault beneath the repository. The same place where the Ashen Ledger had once been stored. We moved quickly, coordinating with the court and the legal team. The original vault was opened, and the ring was recovered again. The court issued an order. The ring was to be returned to secure custody, and the city's records were to be audited. The ruling was a turning point. The altered agreements were declared fraudulent, the original records were restored, and the founding families were held accountable. The city's history was rewritten again, this time with honesty. Chapter 10, The Ledger's Promise *1, The City After the Reckoning. The city did not change overnight. The harbor still glittered, the lighthouse still stood tall, and the streets still carried the usual commerce. But the air felt different, less like a closed story and more like a place that had been reopened. The Ashen Ledger was back where it belonged, its broken ring symbol a public mark of authenticity, and the rewritten agreements had been corrected. Mara returned to the repository with a new mandate, to preserve the truth, not just the records. The building itself felt transformed, as if the silence had been broken. Staff members who had once lived in fear began to speak more freely, and the city's institutions started to function with a new sense of accountability. Rourke took a position as the city's chief archivist, not just a guardian of documents but a witness to the truth. His work became more than preservation. It became protection of the record of the people and of the idea that history could be trusted. I left the city, but I did not leave the case behind. The Ashen Ledger had become part of me, and the broken ring symbol had become a promise I could not ignore. The city's story was no longer hidden. It was visible, and it was mine to carry. In the months that followed, the legal consequences unfolded. The founding families were investigated, contracts were reviewed, and the city began to repair the harm done by the rewritten agreements. The process was slow, bureaucratic, and painful, but it was real. Mara and I stayed in contact, exchanging updates, documents, and the quiet knowledge that the truth had been reclaimed. The ring remained in a secure location, a living proof that the city's history could be restored. One day, Mara sent me a message, a photograph of the Ashen Ledger, its broken ring symbol clear, and a note that read, "The truth is safe." I understood what it meant. The city's memory had been saved, not just for the present but for the future. *2, The Final Truth. The mystery of the Ashen Ledger was not just about stolen documents and a missing ring. It was about the idea that history can be rewritten by those who control the record, and that the only way to stop it is to make the truth visible, accountable, and permanent. The broken ring symbol stood as a reminder that the past is not fixed, it is a promise. And when that promise is broken, it must be repaired. The Ashen Ledger completion. The record restored. *1. The quiet before the final order. After the courtroom upheaval, lights cut, the ring briefly stolen, the city's narrative briefly restored. The city did not immediately surrender. The founding families and their network moved with the practiced patience of institutions that had rewritten history before. They delayed audits, challenged orders, and tried to turn the case into a procedural dispute about technicalities. Chain of custody, admissibility, the ambiguity of seals, and the supposed subjectivity of archival interpretation. But the Ashen Ledger was no longer just a document in a vault. It had become a public fact. The broken ring symbol, authenticated by the iron ring and documented by multiple experts, could not be explained away as a convention or a clerical mark. The ledger's pages, thick, brittle, and stubbornly real, were now under international oversight, with a documented custody trail that began at the repository and ended in a secure research archive inland. The city could threaten, delay, and litigate, but it could not erase the proof. Mara returned to the repository with a mandate that felt like a new beginning. The building had changed. The staff moved differently, their eyes less furtive, their conversations less guarded. The old ownership of the records, unspoken, inherited, and enforced, had been broken. Mara introduced new protocols: dual custody for sensitive documents, mandatory audit logs, public access windows, and a standing records integrity committee that included historians, lawyers, and citizen observers. The repository stopped being a private archive and began to resemble what it was meant to be: a civic memory. Rourke took his place as chief archivist with the same calm authority he had always carried, but now it was paired with an unshakable resolve. He didn't simply preserve the ledger. He enforced the idea that the ledger was the city's shared origin. He began the long work of correcting the altered records, one deed, one permit, one boundary at a time, while building a public-facing record that showed the changes, explained them, and documented the harm they had caused. I remained in the city, not because it felt safe, but because it felt unfinished. The case had become more than stolen documents and a missing ring. It had become a test of whether institutions could be trusted to remember the truth. The threats continued, witnesses were pressured, allies were followed, and the media's tone oscillated between curiosity and skepticism. The founding families still had the power to control narratives, but the ledger had shifted the ground beneath them. One morning, Mara received a sealed envelope delivered by a courier who refused to identify himself. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message written in a tight, controlled hand. "The ring is safe. Do not trade it. The city will try to use Tessa again." Mara's eyes went to me. "They're still hunting her." Rourke's expression hardened. "Then we find her first." We launched a renewed search, not as a private pursuit but as a coordinated effort with the legal team, the court, and the network of people harmed by the rewritten agreements. The trail was difficult. Tessa Riven had been moved between controlled locations, her access to the city's records used as leverage. The founding families were not just hiding documents, they were hiding witnesses. A courthouse clerk who had seen the movement of Tessa provided details: dates, times, and the names of intermediaries. We built a timeline of coercion, intimidation, and the gradual narrowing of her freedom. The city's machine had a weakness. It needed people to carry out its orders, and people could be persuaded to speak. We located Tessa in a secure facility, her freedom restricted, her access to records used as leverage. Mara and I met with her in a controlled setting, with legal counsel present. Tessa's eyes were tired, her expression conflicted. "They told me I would lose everything," she said. "They said the city would destroy me if I didn't cooperate." Mara's voice was gentle but firm. "They're destroying the city. The ring is the proof. If it's gone, they win." Tessa hesitated, then provided the location where the ring had been moved. The city's original vault beneath the repository. The same place where the Ashen Ledger had once been stored. We moved quickly, coordinating with the court and the legal team. The original vault was opened, and the ring was recovered again. The court issued an order. The ring was to be returned to secure custody, and the city's records were to be audited. The ruling was a turning point. The altered agreements were declared fraudulent, the original records were restored, and the founding families were held accountable. The city's history was rewritten again, this time with honesty. But the victory was not just a court order. It was a public act of restoration. The city had to acknowledge what it had done, correct the record, and make the truth visible. *2. The ledger becomes the city's promise. The formal audit began with ceremony and discipline. The Ashen Ledger was returned to the repository, not as an object to be guarded in silence, but as a living reference point for the city's origin. The broken ring symbol was displayed openly, with an explanation of its meaning, a seal of authenticity, a mark of the original civic promise, and a standard against which all later records would be measured. Rourke established a new Records Integrity Office, a permanent body responsible for verification, public access, and the correction of historical errors. The office required dual custody for sensitive documents, mandatory documentation of every transfer, and a public-facing record of changes. It also created a citizen review panel, historians, lawyers, archivists, and community representatives, so that the record could not be controlled by a single family or institution. Mara's work shifted from discovery to stewardship. She began the long process of reconciling the city's deeds, permits, and property records with the original agreements. The task was enormous. Decades of alterations, small and large, had shaped land ownership, zoning, and development. Correcting them meant reopening disputes, reviewing claims, and acknowledging harm. The city's response was not immediate acceptance. Some landowners resisted, some officials argued, and some institutions tried to delay. But the court order and the public attention made it harder to ignore. The city began to compensate those harmed by the rewritten agreements, to restore access rights, and to correct the legal record. The media, which had once treated the case as a dispute over archives, now reported it as a reckoning. The founding families could not easily control the narrative anymore. Their influence was diminished, not erased, but the ledger had created a standard that could not be quietly revised. Mara and I stood in the repository one afternoon, looking at the Ashen Ledger on display. The broken ring symbol was clear, the pages thick with time. Mara's voice was quiet. "This is not just a document," she said. "It's a promise." I nodded, and promises can be repaired. Chapter 12, The Promise That Endures. *1, The Cost of Truth. The restoration of the city's record did not come without cost. Tessa Riven's freedom was secured, but her life had been reshaped by coercion and fear. She chose to testify, and her testimony helped dismantle the coercion machine, but the city's institutions did not immediately forgive her. The legal process continued, and the people who had benefited from the fraud fought back, trying to minimize their responsibility. Rourke's role as chief archivist became a constant struggle, protecting the record while managing the public's expectations, the court's demands, and the city's political pressures. He received threats, but he did not retreat. His work became a daily act of courage, preserving the truth in a city that had once treated it as an enemy. Mara's professional life changed as well. The repository was no longer a quiet sanctuary. It was a contested space where the city's history was being rewritten again, this time with honesty. She became the guardian of the ledger, the symbol, and the idea that the record belonged to everyone. I, the outsider who had been drawn back by a letter, understood that my role was not to stay forever. The city had been restored, but it was still fragile. The truth had been reclaimed, but it required constant vigilance. One evening, I met with Rourke and Mara in a small room near the repository. The air smelled of paper and rain. The Ashen Ledger sat on a table, its broken ring symbol visible. Rourke's voice was steady. "This isn't the end," he said. "It's the beginning of a new standard. The city will remember what it promised." Mara's eyes were determined. "And we will protect it." I looked at the ledger, then at the ring, now secured in a protective case, its symbol a permanent mark of authenticity. "Then the truth is safe," I said. Rourke nodded, "for now and for the future." I left the city the next morning, the harbor quiet, the lighthouse standing tall against a pale sky. The Ashen Ledger had become part of me, and the broken ring symbol had become a promise I could not ignore. The city's story was no longer hidden. It was visible, and it was mine to carry. In the months that followed, the legal consequences unfolded. The founding families were investigated, contracts were reviewed, and the city began to repair the harm done by the rewritten agreements. The process was slow, bureaucratic, and painful, but it was real. Mara and I stayed in contact, exchanging updates, documents, and the quiet knowledge that the truth had been reclaimed. The ring remained in a secure location, a living proof that the city's history could be restored. One day, Mara sent me a message, a photograph of the Ashen Ledger, its broken ring symbol clear, and a note that read, "The truth is safe." I understood what it meant. The city's memory had been saved, not just for the present but for the future. *2. The final truth. The mystery of the Ashen Ledger was not just about stolen documents and a missing ring. It was about the idea that history can be rewritten by those who control the record, and that the only way to stop it is to make the truth visible, accountable, and permanent. The broken ring symbol stood as a reminder that the past is not fixed, it is a promise. And when that promise is broken, it must be repaired. The Ashen Ledger, final resolution. The city learns to remember *1. The ledger's new home. The Ashen Ledger returned to the repository with ceremony and restraint. It was not a triumphant spectacle staged for applause, but a solemn act of restoration. The city admitting that its memory had been stolen and choosing, through law, evidence, and public witness, to take it back. The broken ring symbol was displayed openly, framed by a clear explanation of its meaning, a seal of authenticity, a reference standard, and a warning that the record could not be quietly revised. Mara Venn stood beside the display, her posture controlled, her eyes steady. The repository had once felt like a fortress built to keep the past from escaping. Now it felt like a civic archive designed to make the past visible. The staff moved with new purpose: dual custody for sensitive documents, mandatory audit logs, public access windows, and a standing records integrity committee that included historians, lawyers, archivists, and community representatives. The repository was no longer the private possession of the founding families. It had become the city's shared memory. Elias Rourke took his place as chief archivist with the same quiet authority he had always carried, but now it had the force of a promise. He did not simply preserve the ledger. He enforced the idea that the ledger was the city's shared origin. He began the long work of correcting the altered records, one deed, one permit, one boundary at a time, while building a public-facing record that showed the changes, explained them, and documented the harm they had caused. His office became a workshop of truth. Experts compared originals to altered copies, witnesses testified to the lived consequences, and the broken ring symbol served as the yardstick. I remained in the city, not because it felt safe, but because it felt unfinished. The case had become larger than stolen documents and a missing ring. It had become a test of whether institutions could be trusted to remember the truth. The threats continued. Witnesses were pressured, allies were followed, and the media's tone oscillated between curiosity and skepticism. The founding families still had the power to control narratives, but the ledger had shifted the ground beneath them. One morning, Mara received a sealed envelope delivered by a courier who refused to identify himself. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message written in a tight, controlled hand. "The ring is safe. Do not trade it. The city will try to use Tessa again." Mara's eyes went to me. "They're still hunting her." Rourke's expression hardened. "Then we find her first." We launched a renewed search, not as a private pursuit but as a coordinated effort with the legal team, the court, and the network of people harmed by the rewritten agreements. The trail was difficult. Tessa Riven had been moved between controlled locations, her access to the city's records used as leverage. The founding families were not just hiding documents, they were hiding witnesses. A courthouse clerk who had seen the movement of Tessa provided details, dates, times, and the names of intermediaries. We built a timeline of coercion, intimidation, and the gradual narrowing of her freedom. The city's machine had a weakness. It needed people to carry out its orders, and people could be persuaded to speak. We located Tessa in a secure facility, her freedom restricted, her access to records used as leverage. Mara and I met with her in a controlled setting, with legal counsel present. Tessa's eyes were tired, her expression conflicted. "They told me I would lose everything," she said. "They said the city would destroy me if I didn't cooperate." Mara's voice was gentle but firm. "They're destroying the city. The ring is the proof. If it's gone, they win." Tessa hesitated, then provided the location where the ring had been moved. The city's original vault beneath the repository, the same place where the Ashen Ledger had once been stored. We moved quickly, coordinating with the court and the legal team. The original vault was opened, and the ring was recovered again. The court issued an order. The ring was to be returned to secure custody, and the city's records were to be audited. The ruling was a turning point. The altered agreements were declared fraudulent, the original records were restored, and the founding families were held accountable. The city's history was rewritten again, this time with honesty. But the victory was not just a court order. It was a public act of restoration. The city had to acknowledge what it had done, correct the record, and make the truth visible. *2. The long work of correction. The formal audit began with discipline and public transparency. The Ashen Ledger became the reference point for the city's origin, and the broken ring symbol became the standard against which every later record would be measured. The Record's Integrity Office, now a permanent institution, documented each correction. The original wording, the altered wording, the date of change, the parties involved, and the consequences. The city began to publish these corrections as a public record, not just to fix titles and boundaries, but to acknowledge harm. The task was enormous. Decades of alterations had shaped land ownership, zoning, development rights, and the everyday lives of citizens. Correcting them meant reopening disputes, reviewing claims, and acknowledging that some people had built their wealth on stolen promises. The city began to compensate those harmed by the rewritten agreements, to restore access rights, and to correct the legal record. It was slow, bureaucratic, and painful, but it was real. The media, which had once treated the case as a dispute over archives, now reported it as a reckoning. The founding families could not easily control the narrative anymore. Their influence was diminished, not erased, but the ledger had created a standard that could not be quietly revised. Mara and I stood in the repository one afternoon, looking at the Ashen Ledger on display. The broken ring symbol was clear, the pages thick with time. Mara's voice was quiet. "This is not just a document," she said. "It's a promise." I nodded, and promises can be repaired. Chapter 14. The Promise That Endures. *1. The Cost of Truth. The restoration of the city's record did not come without cost. Tessa Riven's freedom was secured, but her life had been reshaped by coercion and fear. She chose to testify, and her testimony helped dismantle the coercion machine. But the city's institutions did not immediately forgive her. The legal process continued, and the people who had benefited from the fraud fought back, trying to minimize their responsibility. Rourke's role as chief archivist became a constant struggle, protecting the record while managing the public's expectations, the court's demands, and the city's political pressures. He received threats, but he did not retreat. His work became a daily act of courage, preserving the truth in a city that had once treated it as an enemy. Mara's professional life changed as well. The repository was no longer a quiet sanctuary. It was a contested space where the city's history was being rewritten again, this time with honesty. She became the guardian of the ledger, the symbol, and the idea that the record belonged to everyone. I, the outsider who had been drawn back by a letter, understood that my role was not to stay forever. The city had been restored, but it was still fragile. The truth had been reclaimed, but it required constant vigilance. One evening, I met with Rourke and Mara in a small room near the repository. The air smelled of paper and rain. The Ashen Ledger sat on a table, its broken ring symbol visible. Rourke's voice was steady. "This isn't the end," he said. "It's the beginning of a new standard. The city will remember what it promised." Mara's eyes were determined, "And we will protect it." I looked at the ledger, then at the ring, now secured in a protective case, its symbol a permanent mark of authenticity. "Then the truth is safe," I said. Rourke nodded, "For now and for the future." I left the city the next morning, the harbor quiet, the lighthouse standing tall against a pale sky. The Ashen Ledger had become part of me, and the broken ring symbol had become a promise I could not ignore. The city's story was no longer hidden. It was visible, and it was mine to carry. In the months that followed, the legal consequences unfolded. The founding families were investigated, contracts were reviewed, and the city began to repair the harm done by the rewritten agreements. The process was slow, bureaucratic, and painful, but it was real. Mara and I stayed in contact, exchanging updates, documents, and the quiet knowledge that the truth had been reclaimed. The ring remained in a secure location, a living proof that the city's history could be restored. One day, Mara sent me a message, a photograph of the Ashen Ledger, its broken ring symbol clear, and a note that read, "The truth is safe." I understood what it meant. The city's memory had been saved, not just for the present but for the future. *2. The final truth. The mystery of the Ashen Ledger was not just about stolen documents and a missing ring. It was about the idea that history can be rewritten by those who control the record, and that the only way to stop it is to make the truth visible, accountable, and permanent. The broken ring symbol stood as a reminder that the past is not fixed, it is a promise. And when that promise is broken, it must be repaired.